Hello, everyone, and welcome to another podcast episode. Thank you for joining me today. And I have a pleasure of having a conversation with Louise Cashin, who is a long-time yoga student, yoga teacher, and yoga teacher trainer. Hello, Louise, and welcome.
Hello there.
Thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to chat with you because I had the pleasure of meeting you on one of the trainings a few years back, and we're going to talk about this in a moment. But first of all, I really would love to hear about your journey. I mean, I know that you've been a practitioner for over 30 years, and that, you've been teaching, I think, for over 20. And it would be really great to hear about your journey, all the twisting kind of points that happened along the way, and how you ended up doing what you're doing right now.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for asking me to join you today on your podcast. Gosh, my journey, it's had many twists and turns. It feels like I've always done yoga. Somehow it feels like that because my mother tells me that when I was a young child, I used to go out and play with my friends. And we lived in a cul-de-sac, and there was a roundabout in the middle, which was covered in glass, not glass, grass, and had a huge tree. And I was a bit of a tomboy and used to go and rough and tumble with my friends outside. But one of the things that we always used to do was stand on our head. We used to enjoy standing on our head. And apparently my mother often recites that I used to say, you can only be in my gang if you can stand on your head. Now, I'm sure I didn't say that, but that's what she recounts, this little 6 and 7-year-old going on about standing on your head. But I remember as a child, I used to sit in lotus position. I mean, why I used to sit in lotus position, I don't know. But anyway, in terms of when my yoga started, I sort of practiced yoga on and off for a while, but it was a really significant moment in my life. Over 30 years ago now, back in the summer of 1993, when I was out in the Seychelles and I'd been walking along. We'd gone out from the main island, Mahe, and we'd gone out to a small little island for lunch. And I was scrambling around the rocks and realized that I'd sort of got myself into a bit of a tricky position because the water was coming in, so I couldn't really walk back along the sand. So I had to walk up the rocks, really, really steep granite rock, probably about 15, 20, yeah, about 15 feet, I think. So it was quite a scramble. And I lost my footing, and I was in a bathing suit. So as I bounced literally on my bottom off the rock face, I did a lot of damage to myself. And luckily enough, there had been some people at the top of where I was trying to scramble to who'd seen this happen, who very quickly came down to help me, because I don't remember much. I think I must have knocked myself out, because the next thing I remember is I was actually at the top of the cliff face, lying on the grass with all these strangers looking at me. And I did a lot of damage to my spine. I broke my coccyx. I fractured the left side of my pelvis. I was in quite a bad way. Here we were on this idyllic, wonderful paradise of the Seychelles, and I ended up being flown back, lying on, it was a jumbo jet, and I was lying on, the sort of 4 or 5 seats in the middle. Couldn't move. I'd herniated discs. I'd done all sorts of damage. And, I was 30, 31 at the time, I think. And I was very successful in a career. I was in sales and marketing in telecommunications, IT business, bleeding edge technology. Was on my way to a very successful corporate career, which I did still continue. But here I was, lying on my back for quite a long time, taking painkillers. And in fact, it got to the stage where I decided I didn't want to take the painkillers anymore because I'm not very good at taking tablets anyway for anything. And I decided I wanted to really feel what was going on in my body so that I knew whether I was recovering or not. Because obviously the painkillers were just masking all the effects of what was going on in my body. And I wanted to understand that a bit better. And when I was a bit more able, I went to see a chiropractor because I had always been interested in complementary medicine and preventative medicine rather than band-aids for curing symptoms. That's probably why I never took pills. If I had a headache, people would say, have you taken a paracetamol? And I'd go, no, and they'd look at me like, well, why not? You've got a headache, but that's not the way I roll, really. So yeah, it was suggested I go to the chiropractor, and throughout the treatment, the chiropractor suggested that perhaps I might like to do some yoga because he felt that that would help with my recovery. And I did. I found a brilliant yoga teacher. It was Holmes Place, it was called. I think it's now Kingston upon Thames. It's now called Virgin Active or something else. But it was the most lovely, lovely club, lovely group of people, amazing teacher. He was a Guyanan guy, beautiful man, ex-ballet Rambert, and he just was so gracious and so wonderful. And gradually, I couldn't do much when I first went to class. And of course, it was in the days, we're talking about the early 90s to mid 90s, when yoga was just becoming very popular. And it was absolutely packed, everybody was really rammed into a room. And yeah, it took him a while to get round to me because obviously there were over 30 students. But he really helped me, and I really built the strength back in my body. And a lot of the way I am today, I'm 61 now, and a lot of people are surprised that I'm as old as I am, not necessarily because I look young, but because I have a lot of energy. I'm very upright, I'm very strong. And a lot of that is to do with what I learned about my body through my accident. Blessing in disguise in many ways. Obviously, at the time, I didn't really much appreciate it, and it took me a long time to recover. And I still have problems with my left ilium and my left sacroiliac joint. I still have problems. And there's been a few times when I've fallen difficultly and ended up herniating a disc again in my lumbar spine because there is a weakness there. I now have arthritis, so especially around the lumbar spine. But the majority of how I am day to day, the majority of the time, I'm strong, I'm upright, everything functions properly. I have good strength, amazing mobility for someone of my age. And I do really credit that to yoga. I say yoga is a big topic. Really, it's the asana practice that was the beginning of my introduction to yoga, and the asana practice that really helped me get the strength back in my body. But even though the focus was on the physical, I felt and I knew, and it was like a coming home. There was a deeper connection. I felt that connection. I knew it, and it felt like coming home. And it was more than just being physically capable and strong again from the practice.
I love it. I love it. I love how significant that event was for you and how it changed, what happened then later, and now 30 years later. You're not in a corporate world. You are in, being self-employed and working with others in a very, very different way. And, I love what you were saying about mid-90s, early 90s, mid-90s, and how yoga was becoming popular. That's when I started as well. And obviously my entry point was very different to yours. I didn't have a physical accident. I just had a very chaotic life living as a very young person in London, Polish young girl in London on my own. So, and what you just said, coming back home, it's amazing how the yoga practices can really offer that space when they are held by a skillful teacher and
Yes.
a community of other people.
Yes, I think I was very fortunate that the teacher that I found that was very convenient, it's not far from where I live. The timings of when he was running classes suited me. And so I was very fortunate because he truly was a teacher. He wasn't what I would call an instructor. He didn't just stand at the front of class and instruct.
Mm.
He taught us about our bodies, about awareness, about our breath. You know, he taught pranayama and breathing techniques in every class. So, you know, it was more, I said earlier, didn't I? I was saying about yoga, it's a big topic. I'm talking mainly about physical practice, asana practice in the early stages of my practice, you know, my dedicated practice. As I say, I've done yoga on and off before that, but it was this event in my life that brought me to this regular practice because I could see the benefit of what it was doing for me. But it's interesting because I was teaching an online class on Saturday to a group of regular students. And I was mentioning, and I was quoting from one of my yoga teachers' books, Donna Farhi, Bringing Yoga to Life, about the true meaning of yoga and you know, her interpretation of the first verse of the first chapter of Patanjali Sutras. And I was mentioning about how, you know, if as yogis, as yoga practitioners, if we try and explain to people who've never done yoga before how it feels after a yoga class, what it is that brings us back time and time again, it's quite difficult because here we are. And in most yoga classes, and gosh, there's so many of them and so many teachers now compared to when you and I first started. But you know, you try and explain to someone who doesn't practice what it is that brings you back. And it's quite difficult because it's, you know, they think, well, you're just doing physical movement, you're just doing poses, you're just breathing a bit, and then you just lie down, you know. And it's, yeah, it's quite hard to explain that feeling because it's that stillness that we make the connection with that's in each and every one of us. You know, we are at our truest nature, in our deepest essence, peace, stillness, bliss. And yet every day we're layered by all the mundanity, all the day-to-day. And, you know, let's face it, things have got very different in these last few years, especially since the pandemic, the wars around the world. You know, there's this level of anxiety globally felt by everybody, even if we're not directly impacted. And, you know, it's very hard to, you know, feel blissful sometimes and make that connection with inner peacefulness that is there, because we have these layers and layers of to-do lists and responding to things that are going on in the world. You know, at the least, we're all affected by the economic crisis. At the worst, some of my friends are Israelis. So, you know, it's different levels, obviously, of trauma that we're feeling. But, you know, that sense of what we feel after a yoga practice, you know, it's magic, isn't it? How can we feel that good by just moving and breathing and just being in stillness? It still amazes me, even after so many years of regular practice. It just amazes me. So, you know, I think my message to anybody who hasn't tried yoga or has tried yoga but can't keep up a regular practice, you know, a little goes a long way. And a little bit of yoga more regularly, even if it's only 10 minutes of stretching your body and doing a few moves that you've learned, or sitting in silence and focusing on breathing deeply, maybe counting your breath and just trying to breathe a little more fully in and fully out. If you can do that regularly, it would have such a huge impact over time. And I think, you know, people are very busy and maybe people can't make regular classes of an hour or an hour and 15 or an hour and a half. I know when we first started, you know, it was always a 90-minute class, wasn't it? And over the years, it's got shorter and shorter. I think they teach 45-minute classes.
Yeah, even 30 I've seen somewhere. Yeah.
And I know from looking at the Facebook groups, yoga teachers can be a little bit judgmental sometimes.
That's to say the least.
How can you teach a yoga class in 30 minutes? Well, you know, guys, I would rather that if 30 minutes is all people can give, and that's all the time they have, I'd love them to do yoga in it. You know, I guess my attitude has changed. You know, you talked about the journey and, you know, my attitude as a practitioner, what I practice has changed. My attitude as a teacher as well. I'm sure when I first started, I would have said, how can you teach a yoga class in 30 minutes? But, you know, I guess my attitude towards that has changed.
Yeah, and quite rightly so. I mean, nothing really stays the same. The basic principle of life is that everything changes. And I guess I wanted to ask about that, you know, how, because you've been in the yoga world for quite a long time now, how have you seen it change? Have you seen it change? I mean, you were talking about the pandemic, which, you know, I know that overnight I lost 3/4 of my income.
Yes.
And had to really, really think on my feet really quickly to continue working. And in a sense, it really gave me a kick up my bottom to start the institute and really start doing what I really wanted to do. But I know for many yoga teachers that was, you know, really, really difficult time, and many haven't recovered since then. And so I wanted to hear your opinion about it. You know, what have you seen?
Well, if we go back to when I first started, I mean, again, it's interesting, you know, you said you got to kick up the bottom, you know, to do what you wanted to do and probably what is meant to be your purpose in life. I think that's what's happened to me, you know, in terms of the universe or whatever you might believe, guiding you. Because it was, again, another life-changing event that happened, or a series of them that happened, that actually sent me off on my first yoga teacher training. I had been very successful in my corporate career. You know, when I left my corporate career, I was a senior vice president of Europe, Middle East, and Africa for an American technology company. I had about, I don't know, 350 employees or something, $100 million turnover. I mean, we're talking, you know, the late 90s, 2000s, early 2000s. So, you know, in today's value, that's a lot more, of course. But what happened was that we were making restructuring, and it was getting untenable to really manage a business. And I offered myself up. And I remember the words as they came out: rather than make these people redundant, why don't you let me go, you know? And I remember it was like slow motion. And then I thought, what have I done? But anyway, I left. And at the same time, I was also going through a divorce. So there was lots of things going on at that time. And when I sat down and looked out the window at my rather nice BMW car, I thought, well, that's the first thing that has to go, you know. And I'm still living in the house I was living in at the time, because somehow I managed to keep it. But at the time I was thinking, gosh, how am I going to be able to pay a mortgage and do this? I haven't got a job. What am I going to do? Trying to find another job. And I remember at the time, a friend of mine was looking for a premise because she'd lost her treatment room. And she said, can I rent your back bedroom, because that will help you cover the mortgage, because there's a scheme and you pay a certain amount, it's taxable and whatever. I can't remember the whole thing, it's such a long time ago. But anyway, we did it within the right rules and everything, but it was very helpful. And I remember her and other friends at time when I was looking to do some consultancy and it was in demand for some jobs to do that, said, why don't you just take a break? Why don't you take some time off? Why don't you go and live on an ashram and do loads of yoga? Or better still, why don't you train to be a yoga teacher? You love yoga, you're really good at it. You enjoy it, you do it regularly. And so I thought, yeah, why not? So I'd been going to the Shivananda Yoga Center in Putney, and I picked up one of their brochures. And I remember sitting down with a friend and saying, okay, so they do it all over the world. I'm just thinking when would be a time I could go. And I looked at the timing and then looked in the brochure, and it just so turned out that the time I could go, they were offering the 200-hour course over at Val Moran, near Montreal in Canada, which is actually the international headquarters of the Shivananda yoga centers. So I said, okay, well, I'll do that then. And I went to do it, and I really just did it for myself. I did it for my own enjoyment. I went traveling afterwards. I just did it for me. But because I'd come from a sales and marketing background, and because I was in technology, remember, we're talking about 2000, 2001, that sort of time scale, I knew about websites. Now, that might sound really crazy, me saying I knew about websites. I mean, everybody has a website, everyone has social media now. But then 20 odd years ago, they didn't. We had web pages in big corporates, but you didn't have individual small businesses or self-employed people. We were just discovering it. But because I'd come from that background, my then boyfriend, who since become my husband, said, why don't we build you a web page? So I got a domain, and we just had a page, and we had a way of inquiring. And he said, you could just start doing some yoga classes until you figure out what you want to do and what job you want to then go back into, whatever. So yeah, why not? So while I was away in Canada, I'd just done the training, and I started getting all these inquiries about my classes and when did my classes start. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is amazing, And I came back, and my friend who'd been renting my back bedroom to do her aromatherapy treatments had written in a book a list of names of people with their phone numbers and everything, of people who'd said, she told that I was doing the training, and who'd said, yes, I'd love to do some yoga. That'd be fantastic. Let Louise know that when she starts her classes, I'm coming. So I thought, my goodness, this is brilliant. So anyway, I was sitting in my living room. I think it was a Thursday. It was a Thursday evening. It was Thursday evening, and there was a knock on my living room door as one of my friend's clients was leaving, who I also knew in passing. And I said, oh, hi. She said, Louise, would you teach me yoga? Will you do some one-to-one yoga lessons with me? And I went, oh, yes, I'd love to. Yes, of course. And bearing in mind, I literally just come back from traveling, like, I don't know, the Tuesday or something. This is the Thursday night, still probably jet lagged. And I said to her, when would you like to start? She said, oh, how about Sunday? And I went, oh, this Sunday? She said, yes, could you do a 90-minute session? And I thought, well, I didn't think, I just said yes. And so we booked a time, and she went away. And my husband and I looked at each other and went, wow. And then I thought, oh, but I bet, what am I going to charge her? I better get insurance. And it was so funny because the next day I realized that I had to get insurance, all the things that you need to do to teach yoga. And I remember phoning her and saying, look, I may or may not be able to do the class on Sunday, dependent on whether I can make these arrangements. Because when I said yes to you, I didn't really think through the logistics of it all. And so anyway, I did sort it out. And yeah, I guess you'd say the rest is history, because I just could not put on enough yoga classes for the demand for my teachings at that time. I remember renting a place locally here. They had a room that they rented, and I had to take a bigger space and a bigger space. And it was crazy, because I'd have waiting lists almost longer than I could fit people in the classes. And so I was putting more and more classes on. And it was just so incredible. And I didn't really realize what was going on, how amazing this all was, and the life-changing effect on me, on the people I was teaching, this whole amazing kind of love bubble almost it was, I can't even remember how many classes I was teaching a week. I mean, I literally didn't stop. And when I first started, I didn't really think it through. I got slots at places I rented, and I could do 3 classes back to back, to make sure I maximized the rent, if you like. And I didn't really think about it, but, you're giving so much. I came from a corporate job where I was literally, my executive assistant would push me from meeting to meeting, but in those meetings, if I went off, while everyone's talking and arguing or whatever, and I sort of went off thinking, now, what am I going to cook this evening? Do I need to buy anything? Have I got all the ingredients? Nothing really happened, right? If I went off for a few seconds. But when you're teaching yoga, your mind can't wander. You are holding space. And let's face it, and you know this more than anybody else, a number of those people you're holding space for are going through difficulties in their life. They might be vulnerable in some way. So you have to be absolutely in the moment with these people, holding the space for them to express the asana, the breath work from the inside out, and to really hold it for them in a safe way. So I couldn't, go off on a tangent. And I found that I wasn't eating. And it wasn't because I wanted to lose weight. I lost a lot of weight. People said, oh God, I think I went down a size, because I was so busy teaching and giving everything. I didn't have time really to think for myself, and, time to eat.
So did you, this is really interesting. It's not the first time I hear a version of this story. And, when I was running my yoga studio, again, because there was no way to cook in there, and I was there all day long, eating was a big issue, teaching and seeing people and holding space. So how long did you do it for in that kind of way?
It's an interesting thing, because I think that's a brilliant question, because that is not sustainable. And it was one of the biggest lessons I've learned. And one of the things when I've been training other teachers, that I've talked a lot about self-care. And we all know the idea of putting your own oxygen mask on first before helping others. We've heard that over and over again. And we've heard it as a sort of analogy to how we should look after ourselves first, love ourselves first, care for ourselves first, before we care or love for others. But, when you're caught up in the excitement, it was exciting. It was exciting to be so much in demand. I was like a Z-list celebrity going down the high street here. Uwe said we could never, Uwe's my partner, my husband now, he said, we can never go anywhere. People know you. Everybody seems to know you. And they'll say, oh, I loved your class. Or I did a lot of pregnancy. I got very much involved through my friend who rented my back bedroom at the time. She specialized in pregnancy massage. I got involved I trained with Birthlight, the amazing Francois Friedman. and did a lot of work with pregnancy. So we were always being introduced to new babies, you know, going down the high street. Oh, have you met Joseph yet? You know, and all of this. And they all wanted to tell me their story in the middle of the high street. You know, it was amazing. So it was exciting. But it came to a point I'll never forget, you know, bearing in mind, I must have been teaching about 20 classes a week. I used to take Saturdays off, Friday evening and Saturday. But then often I'd organize a workshop. The more I was teaching, the more I got involved with the spiritual aspects, the more deep and meaningful aspects. I trained with Swami Shadananda, my mentor and friend of many years, to teach meditation, I think back in 2004, maybe it was. And so I was doing meditation classes, trainings, and, you know, I would do special workshops. So Saturday was meant to be sacred, but then I would do things on Saturday, you know?
Oh, I can so relate to that. It's
because people wanted, the thing was that, you know, what is it Swami Shivananda said to Swami Vishnu Devananda, go to the West and the people will come. The people never stopped coming, you know. And so I just loved helping people. It was so tremendous, such a wonderful vibe to feel that I was doing something worthwhile and helpful. You know, I'd been making a lot of money selling technology products. And yes, the technology was helping businesses be more productive, et cetera, but it was all about business. I'd been in business to business for 17, 18 years. Here I was with the general public and offering something that for a lot of them was quite life-changing. Certainly it was making a difference to their health, to their posture, to the way they were breathing, the decreasing in colds and coughs that they got because their immune system was being boosted by all the wonderful benefits of yoga practice. So it was exciting. But then I remember sitting out, there was, I think, 25 people all lying in Shavasana in this incredible space I used to rent, the Landmark Arts Centre. For anybody who's local to the Kingston and Teddington area, you'll know the Landmark Arts Centre. And we were on the stage in this beautiful Gothic kind of old church. And everybody used to love it there. It was very cold, but it was a beautiful place. And they were all lying there in Shavasana. And I remember thinking, it was the end of the day. It was about 9:30, quarter to 10 or something, you know, because I used to do back-to-back classes. And I remember looking out at them and thinking, oh my God, I want to be in Shavasana. Oh my God, I need to be in Shavasana. Oh my God, why am I not in Shavasana? You know? Do you relate to that?
Oh, completely, yeah.
And it was this moment that I suddenly realized, what am I doing? What am I doing? What's happening to my practice? When am I practicing? A lot of times, and I see this a lot when I, you know, work with you know, running teacher training. I've run 5 or 6 yoga teacher trainings, as well as CPD in the last, I guess, 10, 15 years. And yeah, I remember saying to them, you know, you've got to keep up your own practice. You get inspired by your own practice. Your own practice is what you're bringing to people, you know, as well as obviously your knowledge and everything, and, you know, of biomechanics, of movement, of spirituality, of the philosophy of yoga. But it's your practice that you have to do. And it's not about doing a practice that is basically formulating your lesson plan, because that's what my practice was, basically. And then I used to force myself twice a week. I used to say, right, you have to go to a class. And I tended to go to the Shivananda Center or to other teachers that I knew. And it was probably about 4 years, 5 years like this, until I met Donna Farhi. And I know you are aware of Donna and her teaching, but if anybody listening doesn't know who Donna is, please look her up. Please look up her books, because learning with Donna, I went on her advanced yoga studies, I think in 2006, was a real eye-opener for me, because it made me realize that, you know, yoga is an energetic practice. For a lot of people, it's very deeply spiritual too. For others, it's purely a form of exercise. But whatever you feel you get from yoga as a student, the teachings are very deep and meaningful. And I really learnt that it wasn't, you know, how far, how much, how long.
How advanced.
This thing about advanced practitioner, what, you know, advanced poses. So that was a real change in my approach to my teaching specifically, but over the years it also really, really influenced and informed my own practice. And of course it's circular, because the more my own practice was informed by really taking much more care of my joints, of my movement, of my muscle strength, really learning that flexibility is one thing and mobility is one thing, but without strength behind it. As we grow older, as we age, that's not healthy, and really starting to appreciate my body more and having more awareness and really tuning into sensation and really understanding how far is enough and this concept of enough.
Oh, I love that. I love
You know,
that. I love that. Only just this morning, I was reading some stuff on Facebook in one of the yoga teachers groups, and somebody was talking about the sense of enoughness and what's enoughness in the movement or in the asana practice. And, you know, and how many long-term practitioners had hip replacement operations because of this moving forward all the time, going deeper and as in more advanced, and being able to do bigger hip openers and bigger movements, something that, you know, maybe it's not really what the body wants, but the mind certainly wants to move forward. And the whole of this thing, what you just mentioned, you know, this more advanced, the cult of being more advanced practitioner, rather than, I always just laugh and I always just say, it's like, well, I learned.
What is advanced?
But, you know, it's like 30 years ago, I was doing downwards facing dog. I'm still doing the same downwards facing dog now.
But it's interesting, actually, because my practice has changed quite significantly, because I think the effect of my injury over time has caused some problems, you know, with arthritis, with changes, early changes in my bones. But it's really interesting, you say, you know, 30 years ago you were doing downward facing dog, you're still doing downward facing dog. Yes, same with me. But interestingly enough, I was thinking about this just this morning. I was doing things like scorpions and handstands and all, you know, because I could, you know, because I could. And it's really interesting, because I think if you want to sustain your yoga practice over time, my opinion, and this is only from my own experience and the experience of the students who, God bless them and thank you so much, I really am grateful to you that they've been with me, you know, 20 odd years. Some of my students, you know, they came maybe when they were pregnant. They've now got 19-year-old sons. You know, it makes me feel a little old, but that's how it is. And it's really, I really, really am grateful to these students who felt they've wanted to stay with me and stay with my teaching. And, you know, just as much as I've had to let go, I've watched them too have to let go of things, because, you know, even I probably still could do scorpion, but why would I do it?
Yeah.
I think just because we can doesn't mean necessarily that it's a good thing for us to do. And I think I know I've experienced, you know, the different feelings in my body in simple postures. And balances, my balance has changed. My ability to do some quite complex balances, you know, it's much more effort. It's much harder. It's not natural, so natural for me anymore. So sometimes if I'm feeling in the mood, you know, I might challenge myself, whereas before these weren't challenges. But I think it's really important for students, practitioners, teachers and teacher trainers alike, everyone who is involved with yoga, to realize that if you want this for the long term, and I hope, you know, people do see this as something long term, you know, that it's a good habit to have. It's a good thing to do. I think you have to really change the way you practice as you feel your body changing. Trying to push these shapes on your body at 55 that you used to do at 30 might not be a very good idea for you anymore, especially if you're noticing that it's causing difficulty or pain or frustration. I remember, again, from Donna, she used to say, skillfulness ends when force and frustration begin. And she used to say to us, do you want to practice yoga skillfully? And of course we do. We want to be skillful in our yoga. So, you know, this idea of forcing it, getting frustrated with not being able to do all of these things I used to be able to do.
Very masculine approach, isn't it? It's like pushing and striving, and what comes to my mind is Vanda Scaravelli, and you know,
Yes.
how this kind of way of being and allowing the body to go into it. And I guess this is, you know, this is also reminds me of the training that we met at, which was the somatic training called Movingness with Peter Appel. Because that's how we met during the pandemic, wasn't it? And we had you know, a real opportunity. We taught actually a joint class for
and
one of the assessments. Yes,
they really enjoyed our teaching together. Maybe we could do that again sometime. Do some teaching together.
So I wonder, I know that, you know, you mentioned few teachers, and I know that you've done a lot of training over the years. But I wanted to ask about the impact of learning movingness, of that somatic training with Peter. How has that impacted your own personal practice and your teaching?
Do you know, it's really interesting because this follows on really beautifully from me talking about Donna Farhi. And I didn't intend to be talking about Donna, and I hope she doesn't mind that I'm talking about her. But it was Donna. I was in contact with Donna, and I was, you know, talking about my own practice and the changes I'd seen through coming through menopause and everything. And I was talking about wanting to find a way of being even more comfortable in my body. And she suggested working with Peter. It was her suggestion to join his movingness course. She said, well, have a look at it. And I just fell in love with it straight away. For a start, the idea of these series of movements being named after animals. I just love the idea that we had a dolphin series, a tiger series of movements, because I'm such an animal lover. You know, I love animals, and I loved just the whole approach. And I thought, okay, this sounds like it could be really good for my own body. So again, interestingly enough, I did the work with Peter, did his training purely for myself, because I wanted a way of being more comfortable with the changes that were going on in my body. So I now have been diagnosed with osteopenia, which, for anyone who doesn't know, is people tend to think of it as the forerunner to osteoporosis. But if you have osteopenia, it just means that your bone density isn't what it should be. And if you make some changes in your life, you can stop it from developing worse and turning into something like osteoarthritis, serious osteoarthritis, or osteoporosis. So I thought, you know, I've got to really learn to engage my muscles in a good way to support my bones, because obviously my bone density isn't what it should be. You know, I've already talked about some other problems that I had following the accident and have been ongoing. So I really wanted something that was going to help support my body, help support my yoga practice. And what I didn't realize is just what impact it would have on me. You know, it's, as you know, it's based on somatic movement. And you know, I think this has now become a bit of a trend. Everyone's talking about somatics, somatic movement, somatic yoga. And it makes me laugh in a way because, of course, you know, somatic just means, you know, of the body. You know, soma is the body. I think is it Greek or Latin?
It's Greek, yeah.
Greek, yeah. So we're talking about body movement, which could mean anything. It could mean football, you know. But in this particular scenario, and a lot like it, like movingness, it means moving in a natural, more natural way with the body, allowing your body to move through your range of motion in a comfortable way. So you're not pushing and shoving and trying to change the shape of your joints or how you move.
Or alignment.
Yeah, like you possibly would do if you were training to be a gymnast or something. You know, if you look at some of these people in Cirque du Soleil, I mean, they are extraordinary and I love watching them. But when you see them in a regular environment, you know, the curvature of their spine, the hips, you know, they've got displacement all over their bodies from the way they've been using them. And I really think that something like Peter's movingness training is something that could be helpful for everybody, because it really helps you become so aware of your natural ability to move and your natural strength and your natural range of motion. And, you know, you mentioned alignment. What does alignment mean? You know, when people say, you know, straighten your spine, well, the spine's not meant to be straight. It's a double-edged curve, you know. Yes.
And for who, isn't it? It's like, it's this, yeah.
It's words.
It's changing slowly, which is great to see.
Yeah, it's words, isn't it? It's words. We need to use our language better in terms of describing movement and posture and things like that, and the way we breathe and meditate. Well, meditation, the mind, everything. We need to really look at what words we use. But I found that his work was so profound that it's really influenced my teaching. And there's a couple of workshops I've done where regular yoga students have come, and literally we've just rolled around on the floor for the first half of a 2-hour class, you know, and they've loved it. And I've noticed that the more that I bring in this more kind of feeling the movement, you know, feeling the body. You know, it's like Peter always says, when we used to do very simple things, do you remember he used to say, pause for a moment and let the experience sink in? You know, we'd do something on one side and he'd say, rest for a moment, you know, and before you go to the other side, because it's that idea of absorbing, you know, the absorbing of what you're doing and understanding it and appreciating it and feeling the difference.
And integrating.
And then integrating it. Yeah. And so I think it's an incredible thing. And I loved the training and I loved the people I met. You know, I've made some good friends. Yeah, I think it's also very helpful, the sort of philosophy and approach behind that kind of teaching, as we are teaching yoga as a life skill, as something that is sustainable. Because, you know, I go back to this idea of, you know, my practice as is now today is different from it was. I think as a student, I've changed the way I practice to serve my body better and to serve
Mm.
me better.
Mm.
And I've also learned that, asana isn't everything.
Mm.
If I've got 15 minutes in a day and I really need energy, probably pranayama and some meditation would be more helpful to me than having to, wanting to move my body.
Yeah.
And, we do get caught up, I know, as yoga students and as yoga teachers, we can get caught up with the physical benefits and the aesthetic benefits of yoga. Because yes, the yoga body can be quite an attractive body, lean, toned muscles, but there's so much more to benefit from. I mean, it's great to have a nice body, but there's so much more to benefit from than that. And I think that that's been something I've learned over time about what nourishes me. What do I need to be nourished, to have energy, to be able to be me, and to be able to give as much as I give to others through the teaching. Now, I don't teach 20 odd classes a week anymore, but I'm still giving a lot to other people, and I need to be whole. I need to be whole to be able to do that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. This is when I work with other practitioners and for myself, I can so resonate with what you are talking about. I think the moment that we, as practitioners and as teachers, the moment we really feel it in our body, in that embodied way, that actually everything is built on our ability to meet our needs in a very empowered way, in a compassionate way, then everything changes. We stop kind of running around like headless chickens, saying yes to everything, doing maybe 20 classes or not eating, whizzing around, into really starting questioning what's important, what works for me. And I think a lot of it comes from this misunderstanding about, as a yoga teacher, I want to be in service. So therefore, I want to give as much, and leaving ourselves out of that circle of self-care.
Yes.
Because we don't understand.
Selfish.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
selfish, but it's not. And I think that's really, really important, that we take care of ourselves, and you were reminding me something, and now it's gone out of my head. Maybe it'll come back while I was listening to you speak there. Because it was that moment, wasn't it, when I realized that I wanted to be in Shavasana, that I needed to be in Shavasana. And it made me think, what am I doing? What am I doing for me? What am I doing for myself? And I think this is, as you say, a misunderstanding, a misconception. When yoga teachers, a lot of teachers come to teach yoga. Hang on, that sentence doesn't make sense. A lot of yoga students decide to become yoga teachers because of the benefits they felt themselves, that they felt that yoga has been so life-affirming in their own life. So they want to teach it to others so that others can enjoy that benefit. But what they don't realize is that the dynamic changes. Becoming a teacher changes your practice. It changes your whole approach to yoga. You go through a teacher training course, whatever teacher training course you do opens your mind to other aspects of yoga. And I don't think any yoga teacher training, however thorough or not thorough it is going to be easy, because there's a lot to learn to be able to hold the space with integrity, authenticity, and in a healthy, safe way for others. There's so much to learn. And suddenly this thing that you loved, because I've seen so many people become teachers and then stop teaching, because suddenly this thing they love has become a job.
Yes.
And we all know what a job is, and the things that come with a job.
Yeah.
I remember being so shocked. This was, I'd started working for a club nearby here, a private club, in January 2003, right? I had approached them. I was a member of this club, and a friend had said, why don't you see if you can teach yoga there? They haven't got a class on Sunday. Why don't you put yourself up for Sunday? And Sunday I decided was a work day. So I offered, and they said, yes, please start. This was at the end of 2002. And they said, let's start in January. So I started in January. And there was another teacher there who, my class got full pretty quickly, and everyone was talking about how much they enjoyed this class. And unbeknown to me, she didn't like this, right? And she was away on vacation. And there was a guy who ran a class at this same club on a Friday afternoon. And he was leaving because he was moving down to the South Coast. And he said to the manager, why don't you offer it to Louise? She seems very popular. She's a nice person. She comes to my class. I know her practice. She's really, into her yoga. I think she'd be great to take over my class. And she's, I think she's sympathetic to the group because she comes to the class often. And this yoga teacher was absolutely furious, the one that was on holiday, that had been at the club for a little while. So this guy agreed, the manager agreed with this guy that I should take over the class. But when she came back from holiday, she said, well, why didn't you ask me first? I've been here longer. And he said, well, you were on vacation, and, it was suggested that Louise would take over the class. So what she did was really surprising to me. Now, remember, I came from a corporate world, sales and marketing, and I tell you, I've had some backstabbing in my time. I was also a woman. I was the most senior member of the board of directors in the European company that I worked for, the European arm of the American company. And most of the men were older than me. There was, I think, 8 or 9 of us. I was the only woman. So you can imagine some of the things I had to deal with, right? So here I am, a yoga teacher. So I was very surprised a week later when I was called into the manager's office to say, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to ask you some questions. I said, oh, okay. He said, yeah, we've had a complaint. I said, oh no, what have I done? Thinking it was a student. It was this yoga teacher. She'd complained about me to say that I wasn't properly insured. I hadn't done proper training, and a whole scheme of things that she came up with that
Wow.
I wasn't obviously qualified and should not only not have taken over that Friday class, but I shouldn't be there at all.
Wow.
So
That's hard.
I had to
That's
get all my
really hard.
paperwork. I had to get all my paperwork. And the manager was so embarrassed. He said, look, what I'll do is I'll call a general meeting so that it's not, directly pointed at you. Because he said, clearly I can see you have everything you need. You have all the qualifications. Now, yes, you could argue that just because I was insured, just because I was qualified, it doesn't mean I was a good yoga teacher. I could have been hopeless, I don't know, or not capable of holding the space properly, I don't know. But her accusations were that I wasn't trained properly, I wasn't insured. So I could prove I was. So he suggested that we call a group meeting with all the teachers so that it wasn't sort of just directly pointed at me. But that meeting never actually took place because nobody, what it's like trying to get everybody's diary together. Yeah. And I taught there for about another 7 years before I went off to do my yoga therapy diploma with the Yoga Biomedical Trust and Yoga Campus, which was a 3-year course. And it meant that I had to dedicate quite a lot of time to case studies and the course. But I ended up with taking on a Monday night class, I think I did. I ended up running some beginners courses, 6-week beginner courses on Sunday evenings every term. I ended up doing loads of stuff at this club. But it just shows you, I mean, what is that about?
Well, it sounds like this is about really people behaving how people behave.
Yeah.
And this also in the workplace. And actually, we sometimes think that just because somebody is a yoga teacher, they would behave in a slightly different way. And actually people, unless they've done a lot of personal development and therapeutic work, they might not have. They just completed the training and they actually continue behaving how they continued.
The same way, yeah.
I mean, this is why, I've done a series of talks around abuse and yoga, and where people just simply assume that somebody who is in a position of teacher will behave in ethical and right way and a safe way. And actually they don't. And I think, this is something that we need to talk about a little bit more. It's not all love and light just because we are yoga teachers or just because we practice it. But actually we need to really still have our wits around us.
And that's
and kind
the
of
point.
Exactly.
Of what I say to people who want to be yoga teachers, because that experience, as we've just said, is of an experience in the workplace. And just because it's between yoga practitioners and yoga teachers, yoga students, it doesn't matter. This sort of thing can happen because it does happen in the workplace in general. And I was really shocked because, of course, my first feeling was, God, I'm a yoga teacher now. This is yoga. How can this happen? And then I realized, well, of course it can happen, because that sort of competitive nature is part of the workplace, isn't it?
Yeah. And it can be the other way, it's like in the trauma-informed yoga teacher training and my other training, we talk a lot about boundaries.
Yes.
That's the flip side
is that
of what you're talking about, where people actually suddenly don't have any boundaries in place, professional boundaries, because they are yoga teachers. So they, going with the flow, and they agreed for it to be an hour. And then it's like 3 hours later, they still doing this session with this client because the client needs them. And, there is so much here to unpick.
Getting on to one of my real hot topics. And we could probably talk for another 45 minutes. Goodness gracious. Yeah. Maybe we can talk about that another time if you'll invite me back.
I'd love to. Let's talk. Let's make sure that we come back again and we continue chatting with it,
because I've got so many stories that that relate to boundaries, not only from yoga teachers, but also the way students behave. Teachers, I've got so many stories from all the years of trainings and all the years of teachings. And
well, I want to say thank you so much, Louise, for joining me today and kind of coming to wrap it up. And I just wanted to ask, before I ask you to tell people where they can find you if they want to find out more about you and your work. But I wanted to ask if there was one piece of advice that you could share with our listeners, somebody maybe that wants to become a yoga teacher. What would, I know there might be lots of different advice, but if there was something that would really kind of be important, what would it be?
Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind would be that it's harder than you think. And the reason I say that is because not everyone that you will be so enthusiastic about sharing your love of yoga with will get it and will want it. And I think that is quite hard when you first start teaching, and you may have experienced this too, when you're sharing something that's so important to you and you feel it is of so much benefit to the people you're working with, and they just don't get it and don't want it. I think being a yoga teacher, meeting people who don't do yoga at meetings, at functions, at wherever I happen to be, there were so many times when they said, oh, I've tried yoga once. Oh, and I didn't like it. you know, and I thought it was quite interesting that people here, this was my job that I was talking about, you know, I'm a yoga teacher. You know, and I remember thinking to myself, well, maybe next time someone asks me, you know, what I do and gives me that kind of response, maybe I should say, well, what do you do? And whatever they do, I should have some negative comment to make about it. And I thought, oh, don't be so childish, you know. But you know what I mean? It's like, you know, why did they think that they could tell me how much they don't like what is something that's clearly important to me in my job? And I think that's quite hard to take at first. So anybody who's wanting to be a yoga teacher and has that real drive and need to nurture others with this beautiful practice, just know that not everyone will get it, not everyone will want it, not everyone will love it like you love it, but you may plant a seed in them. They may come to your class once and never again and decide that it's not for them, but you may have planted a seed, a very tiny seed, which maybe will take time to germinate, but it will. Because if you deliver yoga from your heart and with your love, you will have planted something in another person that will benefit them and be good for them.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you, Louise. That's really great. So where can people find more about you and what you do and your offerings?
Well, I have a website. I'm afraid my Instagram is hopeless. And my Facebook page isn't much better. I'm sorry, folks. I'm a bit old school. I have a website, which is www.yoga-yoga.co.uk. And I mean, people can phone me or they can send me an email. It's louise@yoga-yoga.co.uk.
Lovely.
I mean, you could probably look me up on Instagram and Facebook, but I'm terrible at keeping them up to date. I'm so
It's
sorry.
another job by itself, isn't it?
I'm such a dinosaur.
Thank you so much, Louise. It was a pleasure chatting with you
The
today.
pleasure's all
Thank you for
mine.
taking time. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope some of what I've said is helpful or useful or interesting to other people. You know, I sometimes think, you know, we're talking about ourselves. Is that interesting?
Well, you know, it is. I mean, if you think about this, before we had books, before we had internet,
That's
we
true.
used to sit around the
Tell
fireplaces
stories.
and actually tell our stories, what happened to us and how it changed us, and the challenges and the coincidences and the connections and the growth and healing. So I guess, you know, this is why I love the podcast. This is what we're doing here. We're coming in a slightly different context, but doing exactly the same
I was
thing.
just going to say, it's like we've come full circle, haven't we? With podcasts now becoming popular and yeah, so we're coming back to storytelling, which is beautiful. Thank you
That's right.
so much.
Thank you, Louise.